Hi there. Hi there. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build a basic character rig using Maya, and we'll be looking into building a skeleton, binding the mesh to the skeleton, creating controllers, and adding constraints so that you can make an animation using your 3D model for either an animated short or a video game. So here we go. First things first, make sure that you have placed your character at the origin of 0, 0, 0 on the axis, facing forward in the z-axis. Once you've done that, we're ready to begin. Now we will be using the Skeleton Create Joints tool. Do not build your joints in the perspective view. Go into one of the orthographic views, the side view, front view, top view. Think about your character and which angle is the most representative of the different parts of the character's body. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with the character's back. And for this character, it's basically just a heart with arms and legs, and I don't need too much bending on the heart, so I'm just going to start at the bottom, at the base of the character called the root, and work my way up. Click and click. So I should have, for this one, I'll be able to bend at the joints. So I'm going to be able to bend at the base and bend in the middle, like for the back. So next, I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter, and I'm just going to hit the G button to get back into that same tool and create the leg joints from the side view, because I can see the width of the foot, the length of the foot, and everything. So I'm going to start at the hip. I'm going to work my way down, a little bit forward, go back for the ankle, and then end with the foot. I have built that's going to be the hip joint, the knee joint, the ankle joint, and the toe joint. I'm going to go ahead and rename them. I'm going to rename them all at once using this rename function right here. I'm going to put an L underscore in front of the name, and leg, and then JNT, left leg joint. Since I built these joints from the side camera, they were placed in the middle from the front view. So I'm going to pull it into place like so. And I'm going to match the proportion of the joints with the character. The character is your reference. The joints should more or less go inside of the character. They're going to be driving the mesh around. They're going to be like the bones inside of the character, literally. Next, you'll notice that the back joint, or this is called the root joint here. The root joint is separate from the leg joint. So I'm going to select the hip joint, then select the root joint, and I'm going to hit the P button. What you've just done there is parented. So when you parent joints together, it builds the bone to connect them in between. You select the child, which is the hip, the parent is the root, hit P in between to build that bone in between. Alright, next I'm going to go ahead and make the arm joints from the top, because I can see the proportion of the arm better that way. And here I'm going to hit G to get back into that tool, build the shoulder, elbow, wrist. I'm going to go ahead and build an extra joint to bend, and then one at the end. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to go over the basics. I'm not going to do the fingers, but you can apply what you've learned in this video to do the fingers. Now, since I built the joints from the top, it put the joints on the ground because it puts it at the 0 point of the camera you're facing. I'm going to lift those up by selecting the shoulder and putting it into place. So now I'm going to go ahead and just rename this arm while I'm at it, selecting all of the joints one by one by holding Shift to add to my selection. I hit L underscore arm JNT, left arm joint. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did before with the leg by selecting the child shoulder joint, the parent back joint, and hitting P. And rename my back joint here. Naming things, of course, is very important, especially so if you're working with a team. Next, I'm going to go ahead and mirror these joints over. You don't have to build a separate arm for the other side. You can just select the shoulder joint, go to Skeleton, Mirror Joint. Under the Mirror Joint options, I'm going to mirror across the YZ axis since I'm facing forward in the Z axis. I'm going to replace the name and copy by searching for L underscore, replacing with R, hit mirror, and voila, you've got yourself a right arm. Same thing with the leg. Select the left leg, skeleton, mirror joints. There we go. Full skeleton is in effect. Got the skeleton and I've got the mesh. So now we're going to go ahead and bind this mesh. So binding, or also known as skinning, is the process of attaching the movement of a joint with the mesh. So what we're going to do is a process of binding using selected joints rather than the whole joint hierarchy. I'm going to open the bind menu by going up to Skin, Bind Skin Options, and under the Bind Skin options I'm going to select the joints that I want to bind. I'm going to start with the arm here. And notice that I'm only selecting the arm mesh and the hand mesh and the arm joints. It's only binding the joints I have selected. So I have the wrist joint, the elbow, and the shoulder, and then that extra joint for the paw. Then I'm hitting apply. Hitting apply in a menu will actually leave the menu open so that you may continue the same move over. Next I'm going to select the face and the glasses, but in fact I think I'm just going to leave the for now the eyes unselected. For these mesh pieces I only want to bind them to the parts here that are in the back. I'm not even going to bind them to the legs. This is a strategy that will save time later in painting weights. If you have multiple mesh pieces, it's advantageous for you to not bind using the joint hierarchy method, which will bind to every joint, but rather be strategic about your bind, like so. That's going to save time later when you don't have to paint weights because you are smart. I only have 2 max influences. This is the other option I changed in these options, and the only other one that I think is important. The reason I think it's important is because having less influences can be advantageous in a number of ways. In that, let's see, got my talking and working. I'm going to bind these joints with the leg. Okay, just make sure it works. After you bind, you can test it out by selecting a joint, rotating the joint, or moving the joint, and seeing if it works. Okay, I got off track for a second. Max influences is important. Oh, I have an extra piece right there I can delete. Max influence is important because it tells you how many joints drive any one vertice on a mesh. Maximum influences. So I prefer to have less influences because painting weights is easier, and also the programming is easier with a game. It's less to calculate, so it's good. Alright, I can move on to the next part of the process now, which is going to be creating controllers. Before I move on though, I didn't actually bind my eyeballs here, so what I'm going to do instead of binding is I'm going to group those eyes together, and I'm going to just parent those eyeballs, the group node, to the back joint. And I could very well have bound them, but they'll move with the character for one, but also I'm going to later build a control that rotates them, and I think it works a little better if I'm just going to parent those eyes. So next, for building controls. For building the controls, I'm going to create a series of NURBS primitive circles. The first of which I'm just going to scale up a little bit and move a little bit up off the ground. I'm going to call that the placement control. The placement control is what I'm going to be able to use in order to move the character around a scene, not to animate with, but just to place them into a new part of the scene, and so that the values won't be affected on the other controls. Next, I'm going to duplicate the placement control, scale it down, and snap it by hitting W for the move key and holding the V button down and dragging to snap. And I'm going to go ahead and scale it down a little bit more. What you want to do is make sure that your controls are slightly bigger than the area of geometry that they are controlling. If you need to modify the shape of a NURB circle, you can right-click and move the control vertices as much as you wish. But they should be bigger than the area that they're controlling, because you should be able to select them from absolutely any angle And when you're animating, this will come in handy because you'll be able to see them better and be able to select them. Alright, so I've got a foot control here. I'm going to duplicate that off and put it one character length in front. And I'm going to, rotate it around. One character length in front. And this is going to serve as the knee control. So the knee control is placed out in front of the knee, one character length ahead. Alright, so next I'm going to move my way up. I like to kind of just move my way up, all the way up the character. Duplicate off the foot, snap it into place. And now I'm going to change this shape a little bit. I don't want it to be too far in front of the character. And like so. Okay, so I've got the character root control snapped to the root joint and around the character's body, so it'll be easy to select. I've duplicated it again with Command or Control D, and now I'm going to scale up this next control so that it goes around my character once again. This side's a little far back, so I'm going to select those CVs by right-clicking and just moving them forward a little bit. The next control I'm going to make is the shoulder. Well, while I'm at it, since I already made a, I'm going to move that one up. That's going to be one of the eye controls. I'll come back to that in a little bit. But I'm going to duplicate that off. And notice that rather than going back to the menu and creating a new control from scratch every time, I am actually just duping off of pre-existing controls. And what this does is it saves time, and saving time is very important. Nobody cares how much time something took. So if you are able to make something faster, basically you'll be able to make more things, and that's good. So if you can work smart, try to practice getting faster and finding ways to create shortcuts in your own production pipeline. It's going to be a good thing. Alright, so what I did here is I made this shoulder control, and I've got the pivot point snapped by holding the V button down. D, you can change a pivot point by holding D, and the V, if you hold V, you can snap a pivot point to anywhere. So I want to snap that to the shoulder joint. Then I'm going to duplicate the control, move it, and scale it a little bit, and then repeat that snapping process. Make sure to snap the pivot point to the joint you want it to move with. Duplicate is Command D. I'm going to move it, snap the pivot point again, and I'm just going to make one last little hand control. Whoops. This one's going to kind of change this paw area here. Alright, so now I have a number of controls that are all bigger than the area that they're going to be controlling. And what I want to do now is just kind of scale those down a little bit so they're not too big. This one should be maybe a little wider. And like so. Alright, so I pretty much got all the controls I need. Now I just need to freeze transformations on them and mirror them over. Okay, so to select these controls, if I swipe over, it's going to select a joint. So if I want to make a big swipe to select the controls, what I need to do is hit this button to turn off the selectability of polygons and joints. So now I can swipe over, select all the controls, and in one move I can select all the controls and freeze transformations on them. So notice what happens to these values when you freeze transformations. They're reset. That's very important for later on when you animate. You want to create your control rig so that you can at any time reset the position of that rig when you're animating later. So this is where that starts. Now we just need to parent these controls. We're going to be using a couple of vocabulary words for rigging. FK and IK. For this rig, I'm going to be making an FK arm and an IK leg. FK stands for forward kinematics, IK inverse kinematics. What that means is that forward kinematics, I'm going to create that through this parenting real quick. And oh yeah, by the way, of course, need to rename these. This is called left hand CTO, left wrist CTO, left elbow, and then the left shoulder. Okay, now that I have them all named, I'm going to parent them. Select the child, select the parent, hit P. It's very repetitive. Select the child, select the parent, hit P. Select the child, select the parent, hit P. So now, when I have selected the shoulder and I rotate the shoulder, the elbow and wrist move with it. That is forward kinematics. The motion goes forward. The leg, on the other hand, is going to be the opposite, and we'll see that in a second when we build the IK handle. To continue this FK rig, I'm going to do it with the back too. I'm going to select the shoulder control, select the back control, which of course I also need to rename in the channel box. I'm going to select the shoulder control and parent it to the back control by hitting the P button. Select the child, select the parent, hit P. This control here is going to be known as the root control. The root control will be parented to the placement control, as will the foot control. The knee control is going to be parented to the foot control. So next, for mirroring over these controls. So rather than building new controls for the other side from scratch, all you have to do is one by one, we'll select the shoulder control, group it, and the magic of grouping is such that the pivot point is put at the origin. And the reason that information is important is if you duplicate a group and scale it, -1 in X, it flips over to the other side, voila. Then you can freeze transformations to reset those scales, and you can do the same thing with the foot. So I'm going to hit Command G to make a group, the pivot goes to the origin, Command D to duplicate, scale X -1, freeze transformations, and this should be just about good to go. Let's see. Oh, one thing I noticed about this, it seems that I forgot to change the pivot point. Just double checked. Make sure to, if you're going to be using, we'll get back to this in a second, but if you're going to be using these controls to move a certain part of the body, it does help in order to keep the rig unified that the controls have a pivot point that matches the joint that they correspond with. And I'll get back to that when we make constraints. That, of course, doesn't apply to the knee controls or the eye controls, which I'm going to do now. The eye controls, let's see what we got here. The eye controls, the way that I'm going to build this, I'm going to call that one the left eye. I'm going to duplicate that eye control, move it over. This is going to be the right eye control. Now I have two eyes, and I'm going to put them out, make sure that they're in front of the character eyes. And oh, by the way, if you ever have clutter in any of your cameras, like this extra camera and light, I'm going to go to the Show None menu, then turn back on Polygons and Controls so that I can see what I need to see. So here I have two eye controls. I'm going to make sure I put them in front of the eyes, and it's easiest to see from the front, or freeze the transformations on them. The last thing I'm going to do is just duplicate this one eye control, and I'm going to make it almost like a binocular. I'm going to put it around the two smaller ones, like so, scale it, freeze transformations on it, and then parent those two eye controls to the big binocular control. It's going to move both of them. And then I'm going to parent that also to the back control. So now this should be a unified control rig, like so. So the last step of the process is making constraints and IK handles. To do that, first I'm going to start with the IK handles for the legs because they're really fun. The IK handles can be created by going up to the skeleton menu in the Create IK Handle options. Under the Create IK Handle options, I'm going to change the current solver to a Rotate Plane solver so that later we can build a pole vector constraint. Also, make sure to enable sticky. With sticky enabled and you're ready to go, click on the hip and then click on the ankle, and an IK handle will be created. That IK handle can now pick up and move the leg. Parent the IK handle to the foot control. Repeat the process for the other leg. Select the hip, then select the ankle, skip the knee, creates the IK handle, which you can then parent underneath the foot control, corresponding foot control. And as I go, I'm just changing the names of these controls, which can be renamed at any time. So now you can pick up these feet and make them dance if you want. But one thing we can't do yet is rotate this control. It's not really working yet. So to be able to rotate the control, you need to make a constraint, and specifically an orient constraint. To make a constraint, select the control, which is the leader, followed by selecting the joint, which is the follower. I need to unlock the joints. Leader, then follower. Go to the constrain menu, select orient from the options. This will constrain the rotation axes. Hit apply, make sure that maintain offset is checked. And you'll see now that a blue comes over the rotation channels in the channel box. Repeat the step for the other foot. So what this gives you the ability to do now is rotate the foot at the ankle. Now to build a pole vector constraint. To be able to move the knee, this doesn't do anything yet, but select the knee control, which I need to rename left knee control. Then select the corresponding IK handle, go to the constrain menu, select pole vector, and you'll see a line shoot out from the hip to the control. Now what that does is it kind of tells you you're on the right track actually. So now you can move that control and it should wiggle the knee for you. Repeat the step for the other leg. Constrain pole vector. It should work. Test it out if you need to. Now I'm going to make orient constraints for all of the controls on the arm. So I mentioned hitting apply earlier, and watch what that does. It lets you speed up this process really fast. So I'm going to select the control, which is the leader, the joints, that's the follower, and then hit apply. You know that you did it right because you will see, well, you can test it of course, but also when you do it, leader, then follower, then apply. You'll see the blue channels come up on the rotations. That's what we're looking for. And then when you get into a groove, you can get very fast. So I'm just moving down the line here, selecting the leader, then the follower one by one. The leader is the control, the follower is the joint in this case. Now I've built a control rig for my arm. I'm going to do the same thing for that back control. The last, almost last constraint, second to last constraint, is on the root. Rather than constraining just the rotation values, I also want to constrain the translation values. So the constraint axes on a parent constraint for the root control should work. So select the leader, then the follower, then parent constraint, and add. And then now I should be able to move around the body. And notice that the feet are standing still. That's due to the fact that the root control and the feet control are not connected to one another in the parenting hierarchy. They're both parented to this placement control. Of course, I can rotate the shoulder. Now the last thing I need to do is make the eye constraints. So the eye constraints, I'm going to select the eye control, shift select the eye geometry. Make sure not to select any of this extra geometry here. Go to constrain, and on this one I want to make an aim constraint. Hit apply, and now what this does is something unique. I select the control for the eye, I translate the eye control, which will then rotate the eyeball. So same thing for the other one. Select the eye control, shift select, let's see, get in here a little closer. Shift select the eyeball, then go to add the aim constraint, and you can test it out. Now with this binocular, what you'll see is that you can move the binocular and it moves both, or you can individually animate one eye or the other. Last but not least, is foolproofing the rig. So what I'm going to do is I basically just want to show my NURBS curves here, and I want to make it so that I cannot scale them. I want them to stay the same scale. So I'm going to lock the scale and make it non-keyable by right-clicking and selecting those options. Also, on the upper body controls only, so actually the arm controls and the back control, I want to also lock the translates and make them non-keyable. That way, I can't accidentally move my rig out of place. And that is, in fact, a animatable rig. Thanks for watching. More to come.